Good afternoon. My name is Graham Golden, and I've spoken a few times on the My POV online website. And former police officer from Scotland, spent the last years of my policing career working with the Scottish Violence Reduction Unit, and a real passion for talking about violence in ways that inspire people to act, to do something. And today is a conversation that I've been planning for quite some time now, and for me, it's going to be a difficult conversation, and that'll become clear as we go through. But for me, I think it's a conversation that I need to do, and I think we all need to spend some time with a cup of coffee, sit down and listen to this conversation. And for the last few weeks, almost on a daily basis, I've seen on our news feeds stories of lives being lost. You know, I'm talking about some of the big cities in England and Wales, where young boys, young men, boys in particular, lives have been lost to violence. And the other day I was speaking at an event, and I found myself speaking to a mother who had lost her son to violence. And it was clear that, you know, despite the many years that have passed, it was still very, very raw, and rightly so. And in my years in policing, and especially my years in the Violence Reduction Unit, I've met many mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters who've lost people that they care about to violence. And I'm struck about how society is really good at stepping up when things happen, when people are lost, with their condolences and their action. But my question is, where on the continuum of violence do we intervene? You know, do we wait for something major to happen, or do we, you know, start to learn to spot things, to start to think about what can we do to intervene way before things get to a stage where a person is losing their lives? Because violence is preventable, as we say in this world. And in the past, I've talked a lot about violence, my views and its causes, and what's needed to prevent violence. But today, I'm going to make it personal. I'm joined today by my friend Lynn Burns, and I've known Lynn now since 2013, after her son Sam became a government statistic. And that might sound a bit harsh, but it's often a true reflection, I think, on how you, as society, identify victims of violence as a government statistic, something that won't affect me. I talk a lot about how violence has the potential to be deeply personal to each and every one of us. And that's the point of this discussion today. I want us all to start thinking more about the potential for violence to come knocking at our door, and be activated before that happens, to think about what we can be doing. So Lynn, welcome to this conversation today. You've had a busy day so far.
I have indeed. Thank you for having me along today, Graham. It's nice to catch up with you.
Yeah, we've only met 2 or 3 times in the last few years, and we had plans to catch up last year, but this goddamn pandemic has just meant that we're all sitting in our homes, still talking, which is really good, and still having a conversation. So let's start talking about Sam. Tell me about Sam. Tell me about him as a young boy, as a man, as a dad. And I see that smile on your face. So let's go for it. Come on.
So Sam burst into the world a week late. That was a trait that he maintained throughout his life, and it's one of these kids that you know me, I'm not about, oh, my son was a little angel, because he was a wee roaster at times, but I never had a minute of problems with him. He went away to nursery school. He and I, unfortunately, his dad and I separated when he was 1, and then Sam and I moved to Edinburgh when he was 3, so he went away to Royal Mile Nursery, and he was at Royal Mile Primary. He knew everyone. His primary 1 teacher said that he used to go in on a Monday morning, and it was Mrs. Leshab, and she would say, right, boys and girls, sit down. But Sam, no, he would go round, so how are you, Graham? Did you have a nice weekend? What did you get up to? And she said to me, I can't get him to stop asking his wee chums how they are, and I can't get him to sit down and focus. But that was just Sam. He liked everybody. He was interested in everybody. And we didn't have a bit of issue with him until we hit the teenage years, and then things went spectacularly awry. So that's probably a conversation for another day. But we got through that. Fortunately, we had some amazing support from family and from outside agencies, and we got through that. And then his next big thing was starting to work. He set up his own business, supported by the Prince's Trust. He's working with myself out at Sir Tom Hunter's entrepreneurial spark. Became a dad, and oh my gosh, he was absolutely besotted with the baby, wee Lily. And I remember, because she was born on Good Friday, and I remember going up on the Saturday and I'd taken up a little Easter egg, and they were like, "Are you crazy?" And I showed him, still got it, a little picture. When Sam was born, they used to come round and take photographs of babies in their bassinets in the hospital, and they were the most hideous photographs, but you had to buy them because it was the first picture of your child. So I had this little tiny picture in my purse, and he and I had gone for a cuppa, and I had showed him it, and he said, "Gosh, Mum, how did you manage to get that?" And I said, "That because he thought it was Lily, but it wasn't, it was him." And I said, "Because that's you." And it couldn't, it was like, oh my goodness, oh my goodness. And we'd gone back through, and he'd been a wee bit hesitant about picking up the baby because she was tiny, and I think it's kind of a common thing for daddies and don't want to break their daughter. And he picked her up and he started feeding her. And honestly, my heart sang, because it was like he saw himself and he saw his daughter, and wow, it was a privilege as a mum to witness my child with his child. Brilliant.
I'm going to ask you to define the term roaster for some of our audience here.
Oh, right, okay.
Please, at the very start. Let's explore that word. That's a lovely word.
Right. So it's a kind of an Ayrshire thing. I have been asked about that. So a roaster in Ayrshire is a complete rascal, and it can be good and bad. You're roasting my heart, and I suppose it's a label, and I don't really like labels, but I think it's probably a gentle label where you can hold people to account and be kind, but also stop being a roaster.
Yeah, I think Scotland's got many terms like that, where we actually still hold somebody close to our heart when we use words which to some people might sound quite derogatory, but actually in many ways they're a compliment, aren't they?
Absolutely.
I knew Sam, and when I was working with the violence reduction unit, I got to know Sam, and this must have been 2012 into 2013, and God, he had a wicked sense of humour, and you just talked about that. He was switched on, and he was, I think, when I met him, he was supporting setting up a domestic abuse helpline in your hometown. Yes. And it's just the way that he had the two ladies wrapped around his finger. It was just incredible. He had them, but he was bringing in some good knowledge around IT and technical stuff, which they just didn't have a clue on, and they were very happy to let Sam get on with it, and he did. But what struck me about Sam, and we met a few times, Sam and I, and talked about what he was doing, and he was just one of these guys where you just thought, you're going to be a fantastic father. You are going to be, you care about this, and I wasn't aware of the past issues that you just talked about there, but he was somebody who I think fatherhood was going to make Sam into the person that he would have been, he should have been, he deserved to have been. I read about what happened to Sam. I can remember it vividly. Perth railway station. I was coming back from an event. I remember buying a newspaper, and that was it. I saw the headline in the paper, and I can remember the weather. I can remember loads of it. And they often say, where were you when something happened? And I can remember it, and it just stood there completely and utterly shocked about what I was reading. What happened with Sam and his friends? Do you talk about that?
So Sam had gone to his girlfriend's house, gone on the Thursday actually, and he'd said to me, right, so I'm going to meet his girlfriend, and it was a flat that his girlfriend shared with her friend. It was reported as a party, but actually I think there were perhaps half a dozen, 9 people there. What happened was his girlfriend and her friend and her friend, Sam's younger brother, I think I've said to you before, Sam's dad and I split up, but we were in very good terms. Thank goodness we were in very good terms to get through what we got through. So he's a little brother, and at that time his little brother was 17, and he had messaged Sam to say, could I come along with the 3 boys who were ultimately involved in this? And that was fine, and they'd gone along. Now the young people that night were taking legal highs. 2013, we still had legal highs. It became very clear and very apparent afterwards that the massive impact on their capacity to recall any details at all. So they were taking these legal highs. There was alcohol involved, and what happened was Sam's brother was assaulted. someone hit him over the head with a bottle, and there had been another kind of altercation over a bottle of vodka, which Sam was kind of trying to sort out. Because when he became a dad, Graham, I think I've said this to you before, I had said to him, now if you see any trouble, you run, don't even walk, you run in the opposite direction, you're a dad now. However, he turned around, saw his brother bleeding, and Sam had said, oh no, this is not happening, and gone into the hall. And from what we understand, because one of the girls hadn't been taking legal highs and hadn't been drinking, it was about 30 seconds later, he staggers back into the room, he's holding his chest, and he says, oh my goodness, oh my God, they got me. And what had happened was that one of them had picked a knife up and stabbed Sam in the heart, which penetrated 3 chambers of his heart and cut off the blood supply to his lungs. And I was told at a later date, quite quickly after that, I think I've told you this before, that I think it was a pathologist had said to me, this was a catastrophic wound, and even if it happened in resus, in hospital, Sam was never coming back from that. Now, there were 2 things about it that we think that one of the young men held Sam's arms at the back while the other one stabbed him. But these boys, even when they left the party, they didn't know that they'd killed him, because they were on social media. And they phoned the local hospital, Cross House here in Kilmarnock, to see. So they didn't even know that to take a knife and to put it, and this was a knife from the house, so it was in the block thing in the kitchen. But to pick a knife up and put it near another person's body, there's a pretty good chance that they're not coming back from that. But I always go back to, did that young man who did this waking up that morning and say, do you know what, I'm going to kill Sam Johnson today? And he didn't. This boy was 17, the other boy was 18, and the other young man involved was 22. And they were known to us. The boy who did this, who's in prison for murder, went to the same Sunday school as us. He was baptised in the same church. We knew that these young men, we knew them.
I think that's something that you've said to me before, is that, you know, people don't wake up that day and you know, by the end of today I'm going to kill somebody. That's just not what happens. And it just shows how something can just move from such a pace to such an outcome. And you said to me, I remember you said to me, you know, a few years ago, you know, they used the phrase that they're just wee boys. Why? What did you mean when you said that? And you've started to touch on that just now, but they're just wee boys. What's your thoughts on that?
They were just wee boys. I mean, 17, Graham, 18 and 22. And I think it's the third young man at 22, I think he was about 22, 23. He had a child the same age as Sam's child, and he took his own life 24 months ago. So these were young men who have done something which they're going to have to live with for the rest of their lives. I remember my friend who was a Sunday school teacher had said to me, do you know, we can't believe that one of our boys has done this to one of our boys. And then she said, oh, that's awful, and I shouldn't say that to you. But that was it. We're a community here. Saltcoats, Ardross and Stevenson's known collectively as the 3 towns. We're a small community. And the Sam's brother, who had been assaulted, was at the Busy Bees nursery with both of these young men who did this. So the boy who did it was in Sam's dad's house that day. They were 17 and 18, and I just think that their lives are impacted as much as, maybe not as much as, but their lives are impacted as well, because they, you know, one of them's home, and I see them regularly, and I get looks from them regularly, but they have to live with what they've done. This other young man will come home at some point and be in the same town as me, 500 metres along the road that way. They've got to live with this, and for all the bravado and the, you know, apparently I've heard feedback, he's in the young offenders at Pullman and he's bragging and all that, but for me, in the deep dark night, at some point you have to own the fact that you have taken the life of someone that you knew, and he loved Sam. You know, he was Ross's friend, but he loved Sam, and he's killed him, and he can't ever change that.
No, I think, I've heard you speak many times about the incident, and your recollection of the events, your recollection, obviously, of what you were told about the situation. You spoke. I've seen you spoke on the, I think it was the Jeremy Vine show a couple of years ago. You were on television, and I remember you speaking about that same selflessness in many ways. Thinking about other people. That's what it is. I see you. You're thinking about your community. You're thinking about the boys as victims in many ways. And and I remember Jeremy Vine just, it's incredible the presence that you have around these issues. And I know you've had some issues around the criminal justice system. You've talked about that. I've seen that in the newspaper, and I saw a news story about how you felt in many ways re-traumatized by the justice system. What did you mean by that?
I think I think you're aware that I sit on the Scottish Government's Victims Task Force, and what I felt was at the time was that we were having to repeat our story, for want of a better word, over and over again, and that we after Sam died, we were catapulted into a world that I didn't even know existed. There was vocabulary. I remember the senior officer saying to me the following day, because I said, I need to see him, thinking I was going to Crosshouse Hospital to the mortuary, but he said he's still at the locus. I'd never heard that word before. I'd never heard that term. And then when they explained to me he was still where he had died, I'm thinking, oh my Lord, don't leave him. It's somebody with him. And so you're catapulted into this process. I think I've said to you previously as well, I've made no secret that Sam had 3 post-mortems, and we almost didn't get to see him, not because of the injuries he endured during his murder, but because of the process. So you're catapulted into this process. And what I now know, speaking to people who have had attempts made in their own life, or who've had a loved one murdered, or whether they've suffered sexual violence, we seem to have the same issues, Graham, pop up over and over again. And there's almost this, it was like when we went to identify Sam, it will be on the television screen, and the television screen will show for 1 minute and then it will be switched off. And that was my boy. And I get that he's evidence, but that term was used with us, that he's evidence, but my baby. And I just, and I've spoken to countless mums who have experienced the same thing. And what I was thinking was, this really doesn't need to be like this. There's a better way of presenting this, surely. There is a better way of presenting, where we care. So what did we have? 62 murders in Scotland last year. 64 in 2020, 62 the previous year. Surely we can wrap families and victims in a bit of compassion and say, do you know what? I've fed up with the term smart justice, I have to say that, but surely we can say, right, let's get a more joined up way of operating. Let's have a cohesive strategy of, this is what we do. This is how we process this, whether it's sexual violence or whether it's murder or culpable homicide. Surely to goodness we can do a bit better.
Yeah. Excuse me. No, I think, having, as a former police officer, I spent 8-9 years as a CID officer. And we often, I think back then, with the system forces you to sometimes use certain language, certain words and narrative, but deep down, I think police officers are mums, dads, members of society, and I think lots of cops want to be that. So I think we need to permit them. I think leadership in the organisation is very much about giving them permission to be human beings. That smart phrase, smart policing. It's not about being soft. It's about being decent to human beings, decent to other people. So how do we better support victims' families, do you think? What do you aim to achieve through this group you're on?
So I would like an overarching, we are Scotland and this is how we do justice. And I think that would be not attributed to any particular political party or affiliation, but just, this is how we deal with it. I've said before, the number of children and young people who are care experienced in Scotland, and then compare the prison population of who is care experienced, there's something not right there. And we need to be getting to the bottom of that. We need to be asking ourselves a question that if someone is shoplifting to fund a drug habit, is it better to remove children and put them into prison in custody, or is it actually better to say, you know what, we're going to manage this in the community, and we're actually going to put the services and fund the services? And I've said this to the Justice Secretary. And just what you're saying about police officers, our family liaison officer would come out of the Procurator Fiscal's office in Kilmarnock, and that was her handing us over to via Victims Information Agency. And she gave me a huge big hug, and she was in tears, Graham, because these men and women are going through a journey with you, and it can't do anything other than affect them. So I think you're right. I think what we need to do is we need to build up a bit of resilience and scaffold up the men and women that are in the front line in dealing with this. But also we just need to be aware of what's the big picture, what's the overarching situation that's going on here. I think I've said this, and to me, justice is like a big game of joining the dots, but half the dots are missing. And I've said this to Cabinet Secretaries for Justice, I've said it to the Lord Advocate, and we need to wrap justice in maybe the mission statement is not the right word, but it needs to be an intention. This is our intention. Our intention is to make Scotland the safest place in the world to live. Our intention, now, there are people who have to be incarcerated. You know, you can't be having child murders and people who are, you know, there are people who need to be incarcerated, but let's have a look and say, does everybody have to be in prison? Yeah. You know, how do we keep the public safe? How do we serve victims and families? How do we serve the people who have committed offences? The young lad who actually murdered Sam had a member of his family, his sister, die, not through violence, but through a dreadful accident. So this is a family who had known trauma. So where were the services in there scaffolding up and supporting that family? So I think we just need to be asking better questions, but it would almost be good to have a check-in, temperature check. How are we against, this is our stated intention for justice in Scotland, how do we do that? And are we serving the population? Because you know what? Our politicians are there because we voted for them. They are there to serve us. Our serving police officers and social workers and that entire team, they're there to serve. But we need to enable people to do the job and to do it holistically, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. You talked compassionately about the police officer and her experience as a family liaison officer. You know, I think police officers nowadays are exposed to so much. And there's something I learned today about, it's called compassion fatigue. Yeah. It's when you know, you're exposed to so much trauma in your nursing role, your police role, whatever role that is, and it actually can have adverse effects when you're doing your job. So you lose the ability to be compassionate. That's you know, I think that's compassion fatigue. So for me, it's about, you know, leadership in policing. It's about leadership in government. And, you know, there was something in health a few years ago, and Jason Leach, who's over the news just now, he talks about that, what matters to you. If you're in hospital, you know, often you should be asked by a clinician, what matters to you? So that if you're in hospital for a matter of days, you might, I remember he told a story about an older man who was concerned about his plants not being watered. So the plants were brought into hospital, and it just made him feel more comfortable in that surrounding. You know, so yeah, you're right. I think, you know, it's you talked about you know, that need for us to be more aware of what's going on in society around young people, especially. You know, do you think Scotland itself, society itself, the UK itself, needs to get better at understanding what's actually going on in our communities, the trauma?
Absolutely, because it's so polarising, Graham, isn't it? It's so polarising. You're either in the baddie camp or you're in the goodie camp, and actually there's only us. There is only us. We are all on a line, and it just depends where we are on that line. And I've kind of said before that a lot of people in my family are angry with me because how dare I forgive people? But I can only do that because that's the only way I can get up in the morning. I've had my son, I'm not having my hate as well. So how do we educate people to stop? We've got people that at the moment are saying that, you know, if you have a house party, you should have 10 years in prison. Well, you know, really, imprisoning people worked out in America? You know, can we do better? Can we do, well, I nearly said the smarter word there, but can we do that? How do we inform and educate? And I think it has to be about conversation and communication, because if folk don't understand, we need to upskill their understanding. We need to explain to people, like, see, if we do that, this is the likely outcome. See, if we put someone in prison for shoplifting or for hitting an old lady over the head and taking her purse, it's not a case that they're in prison and they've got a warm shower and a television and a PlayStation in the room. That's not. But see, if we actually take them into the community and we take a percentage of that money and we actually work to try and stabilise and give that person the opportunity to pivot and change their behaviour, that's actually going to keep you all safer. Yeah. If we look at children, and we, you know, I've got serious concerns about my granddaughter, just because I think she has gone through so much trauma. And, you know, Sir Daddy's 30th birthday in November there, and she was up there hugging the gravestone. Now, we don't take her up very often, but this child is acutely aware at the age of 8, nearly 9, that Daddy isn't there. And I think, gosh, the other young man that was involved in this, I think I've said this to you as well, Graham, he's got a young person, a wee child who's the same age as our wee Lily. How do we scaffold these children up to give them the potential to go out and take the opportunities in life? And the only way I can see it is by talking about it, and it's by having difficult conversations, but it's also by having those people in authority understand the issues and be prepared to step up, support issues, even if they're unpalatable and unpopular to begin with. But do you know what? 30 years ago, we didn't wear our seatbelt in our car. And 30 years ago, I remember distinctly my father drinking and driving. You wouldn't even contemplate getting in your car today and not putting your seatbelt on. So change is possible. And it's about getting really clear on it and then adopting it as a mantra. This is what we're doing. This is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it, and keeping it going.
I think, you know, you talk there about, because that's the paradox, isn't it? If we actually did things differently and started to understand the issues, we would actually have safer streets, safer communities.
Yes. Yep.
You know, we would save lives. You know, this. Yes. I'm doing a bit of work just now on drug prohibition. If we were to end the war on drugs, we could probably save even more lives. You know, drugs are fueling violence in our society, and in many ways, is policing fueling violence. That's a whole other conversation I might do with somebody else. But it's right, and I think it's about dripping this information into society, and people watching this thinking, you know, what's in it for you as a society, as a community, is safer streets. Yes. You know, and if you're a police officer watching this, thinking differently, thinking about trauma, it's about even getting your meal breaks every day, because police officers are going to work at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the morning, and they finish at 3 o'clock. Some of them are not getting home until midnight. They're working all day. They're going from call to call to call. You know, the burnout. They must be really, you know, going through a lot of trauma in their own lives. And I think if we were to start to think differently about these issues and start to better understand the communities, cops we could reduce demand. We need to start thinking differently. So I think you're spot on there. It's about, you know, we all have that role to be uncomfortable, and you know, some of the best outcomes come on the other side of that uncomfortable conversation. And it isn't just about bad people, it's about good people doing nothing as well. You know, that's another, I talk a lot about that in other work as well. But, you know, one thing I love about you, Lynn, is that you every so often you post some wonderful pictures about Sam. It's great. And Lily as well. And you've allowed me to use some of the pictures in my work and my talks, and thank you for that. It means a lot for me, because I think stories, when I tell stories, I try and make it personal. And Sam is very much there. You know, Sam has been with me in Sweden, been with in America. We've talked about that before. He's traveled the world. You know, he's there talking and, you know, educating different people about the issues. But let's end. You know, what type of dad would Sam have been? Let's go back to Sam. You know, tell me, you know, what do you think the type of dad is Lily going to miss?
I think Lily's going to miss the kind of dad who wanted her to do everything that he wasn't prepared to do. I remember him saying to me, she's going to be a geek, Mum. And I'm saying to him, did you not think we wanted you to be a geek? and I'm not looking through this with rose-tinted glasses, Graham. We would have had ups and downs as well because of young people and the way that they behave. And Sam was navigating out of this. But that little girl is missing out on a dad. There's one picture that I found. I'm going to get upset. I just found a few weeks ago, and I'd seen it. I didn't realise I had it, and they were at the swing park down at the shore front in Ardrossan, and he's looking at her, and she was only tiny at the time, she was maybe 14 months, and he's just looking at her, and he just adored her, and she's missing out on that pillar of love and unconditional acceptance that every child is entitled to expect.
Yeah.
Every child's entitled to expect, that's my person, and no matter what I do, that person's got my back. So she's missing out on that, and worse still, he's missing out on raising his daughter, and it's not fair. It's not fair on either of them. They lose one another. But I also, in my woo-woo beliefs, but think that they are connected, and I share pictures because it's important for me that it was not all for naught. That Sam. We've spoken about legacy and how do, I think this is a mother thing, because lots of other bereaved mothers that I speak to, it's the same thing. How do we keep our child's name? How do we get something good and valuable and worthwhile to come out of something so hideously horrible? How do we do that? And for me, that's it. But in terms of the pictures, I'm running out of them, Graham. And, you know, I was thinking there at Christmas, I thought I would give anything for one more photo at the Christmas table or whatever. So I will keep sharing the photos, but like people's wedding photos, they're becoming a wee bit dated now. And what that does is it intensifies and it makes the loss even more painful.
I see these pictures, and it's like that moment captured in time, isn't it? Isn't young going to get any other pictures? And you know, and it's a sad thing. But you know what I see is, you talked about Lily's trauma, and you're the buffer. You're there for her. You're that consistent person in her life, and let's not underestimate the power that you're bringing to that young girl's life. And at least she can talk about her dad in a nice, kind way, and know what type of man he was. You know, there you go, folks. That was the point of the conversation, was to really spur people on to start thinking differently, to start thinking about their role in prevention. Violence wrecks futures. And Salmon was someone whose future was bright. Talked a lot about Lily today, and beautiful young girl, absolutely wonderful. And she's learning loads about her father from a wonderful grandmother. So for me, this talk today is about a call for us to look at ourselves in the mirror. You know, for me, the answers to violence lie in our communities. Lynn's touched on that as well. It's about, you know, not just supporting families who've lost loved ones, but it's actually supporting young people in the communities. And you know, I'm doing some work with Bedfordshire Violence Reduction Unit just now, and they're talking a lot about the village. They're creating villages. It takes a village to raise a child, and really trying to build that sense of community within their prevention outlook, and it's a wonderful thing to do. I think for me, the first thing that all of us can do is to acknowledge that violence could at any time come knocking at our door, and for some of us it already has. And I feel that when you start to look at violence as something that could be personal to every one of us, we're more likely to see some urgency to respond to prevent it. And I also think we're less likely to blame victims of violence. We see victims far too often being blamed for what happened to them. And for me, some other things that we can all be doing to support wider violence prevention is really support the building of relationships in your community. We're seeing a lot of that just now with COVID. We're seeing a lot of communities coming together, supporting the elderly, supporting the young. That's what we need. We need more and more of that. It's all about relationships. You know, volunteer to support young people. We're talking just now a lot about schools extending the school day or working over the school holidays. We just need to build relationships at schools, make young people feel safe and supported. If we get that right, the academia will come along. If it's there, it'll come along. And that's what we need to think about. You know, become curious. And Lynn touched on this. Become curious about why violence happens. These incidents that Lynn's talked about today, they don't just happen. Something's happened way before that, either that day or in the past, as Lynn has talked about. And a lot of the issues that we see in our streets are rooted in early years experiences. They don't excuse behaviour. Let's be clear on that. They don't excuse a person's behaviour, but they really help us to understand it. And domestic abuse, as a police officer watching this, take domestic abuse seriously. There'll never be peace in your streets until peace in the home. Really start thinking about really attending these calls, supporting victims, validating their experiences, and supporting the children as well. I talk a lot about men and violence. Violence for me, and you can disagree if you want to. For me, it's a man's issue. The vast majority of these cases involve boys and men as victims and as perpetrators. So for men watching this, let's be the guide. Let's be good guideposts for our sons and our daughters in the future. Acts like we've discussed today, as I said, they don't just happen. Learn to spot behaviours, the words, the language that can lead to situations, and be that friend, be that colleague, be that person who just spots something and just takes a friend away. Don't have to say anything, just take your friend away, and who knows what we can prevent. As a police officer, I would interview people time after time who had witnessed friends being assaulted, being murdered, and they would often say to me, "Oh, I could tell this wasn't going to end well. I knew something was going to happen." So we need to help you spot up, step up around these issues. Yeah, and I think that's all I want to say today. It's been a powerful conversation for all of us involved in this conversation today. I hope you have took something from this conversation with Lynn and I. And thanks again, Lynn, for taking the time to come. And once we get through this pandemic, we're going to grab a cup of coffee, a glass of wine, or something. We're going to do something and catch up. And so you take care of yourself.
Will do. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Good.